My wife cheated on me. With a beggar. It was the kind of affair that turned heads in our small, sleepy town. My wife, Amelia, was known for her elegance, her charm, and the way she could command a room with her presence alone. She was the woman everyone admired, the kind who seemed too perfect, almost untouchable. So, when whispers began circulating about her infidelity, people were too stunned to believe them. They thought it must be a lie. I, too, wanted to believe that. But the truth was far stranger than anyone could have imagined. I first noticed the change in her a few months ago. It was subtle at first, the way her gaze drifted past me, as if I were a ghost occupying our home. The way she spent hours staring out the window at the park across the street, lost in thought. The soft sighs she made, as though she was carrying a weight too heavy for her to bear. One evening, I followed her gaze and saw him, a man hunched against the park's iron gate, wrapped in tattered blankets. A beggar. He was a fixture in the neighborhood, a shadow most people ignored. His clothes were always filthy, his beard wild and unkempt, and he rarely spoke except to ask for spare change. I had never given him a second thought. But Amelia had. And it became clearer with each passing day. She started taking long walks in the evening, often just to get some air, she said. I could hear the soft crunch of her footsteps as she crossed the street, my heart sinking each time. It was as if she was walking further and further from me, with no intention of ever returning. I told myself I was paranoid. I was imagining things. But then one night, I decided to follow her. I stayed a safe distance behind, watching her slip through the streets, her silhouette graceful in the moonlight. She approached the beggar, and what I saw next made my stomach turn. She knelt before him, gently touched his face, and smiled. Not the polite smile she gave to strangers, but the kind she used to reserve for me, a smile full of warmth, intimacy, and something more. They exchanged a few whispered words I couldn't hear, and then, she kissed him. Passionately. I felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. My wife, the woman I had spent a decade with, was in love with a man who slept in alleyways and begged for scraps. A man who could offer her nothing but filth and shame. But why? I confronted her that night. She didn't deny it. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands trembling, her eyes red and swollen from tears. I love him, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Love? I spat. How can you possibly love him? He's a beggar, Amelia. He's got nothing. Her eyes met mine, and there was a depth there I hadn't seen before, a rawness that both frightened and intrigued me. That's exactly why I love him, she said. He's got nothing, but he doesn't pretend otherwise. He doesn't wear masks like we do. He's real. Real? My mind reeled. I had given her everything, security, a beautiful home, a life most people dreamed of. And now she was telling me that wasn't enough? That she'd chosen this man over me because he was more real? I couldn't wrap my head around it. But Amelia was resolute. She spoke of the beggar, whose name I learned was David, with a kind of reverence. She told me how they had met one afternoon while she was out for a walk. He had asked her for change, and instead of brushing him off like everyone else, she had stopped. They talked. She learned about his past, how he had once been a successful man, but a series of tragedies had led him to lose everything. In his vulnerability, she found a truth she had been missing in her own life. I feel alive when I'm with him, she confessed. He doesn't care about appearances or wealth. He sees me for who I really am. I was stunned into silence. I wanted to scream, to demand how she could throw away our life together for a man who lived on the streets. But deep down, a part of me understood. We had been living a lie for years, our marriage a facade of perfection that had long since crumbled. Amelia had found something real, something raw and unfiltered, in David's world of hardship and struggle. Days turned into weeks, and I watched helplessly as she slipped further away from me. She spent more and more time with David, leaving me alone in our empty house. I became obsessed with him, this beggar who had stolen my wife's heart. I followed them, watched them from afar, hoping to find something, anything, that would make sense of it all. One night, I approached David myself. I needed to confront him, to understand what kind of hold he had over her. He was sitting on the same bench, his back slumped, his eyes hollow. When he saw me, he didn't flinch. He simply stared, as though he had been expecting me. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said before I could speak. But it did. Why her? I demanded. Why my wife? He sighed, running a hand through his unkempt beard. Because she saw me. Not just the man sitting here in rags. She saw me. No one else ever has. I didn't know what to say. He was right. In some strange, twisted way, Amelia had seen something in him that I never could. It was as if they were two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of places. As I turned to leave, David spoke again, his voice low and gravelly. "You still love her, don't you?" I stopped, my heart pounding. "Yes. I do." "Then let her go." His words cut through me like a blade. But deep down, I knew he was right. Amelia had already left me long before she met David. Holding on to her would only prolong the inevitable. So, I let her go. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but in doing so, I found a strange sense of peace. Amelia and David left town soon after. Some say they moved far away, to a place where no one knew them, where they could start fresh. Others claim they were seen in nearby cities, living hand-to-mouth but together, content in their unconventional love. As for me, I stayed behind, rebuilding my life from the ruins. I never understood why it happened, why Amelia chose him over me. But in the end, I realized that love isn't something you can force or control. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes it takes you to places you never expected to go. And sometimes, it leaves you alone with nothing but the memory of what once was.